My name is Alana, and I use they, them pronouns.
And my name is Jessie. I use she, her pronouns.
And we're making menches.
Making Menches is your home for queer, anti-Zionist Jewish ritual, radical education, and community.
Hi, everyone. We are so excited to be back for episode 2 in our Judaism and Abolition series. And we're super excited to have a guest for today's episode. We're going to be talking to Ayeola today. Ayeola, it's so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Ayeola is a revolutionary surrealist artist who creates artwork that synchronizes abolitionist dreams and experiential reality. So obviously the perfect person for us to be talking to in this abolition series. Ayola's craft is inspired by her Jewish ecospirituality and the divinity that seeds the intersecting threads of disability justice, gender liberation, racial equity, and class abolition. With all that being said, I'd love to just start us off with, what does abolition mean to you?
When I think of abolition, I think it's a quote by Angela Davis where she says, abolition is grasping at the root, basically just looking at what is the foundation of whatever issue it is that we're facing and attacking that rather than what's come from it. That just saves everyone a lot of time, and we only have one lifetime in this moment to do what we're trying to do. So yeah, whatever is the foundation, like restructuring that instead of reforming. Abolition is the antithesis to reforming.
100%. When I'm thinking about abolition, it's like we're not just like changing the same system that exists, but we're like completely dismantling and starting from the root, like the ground up, because that's where we're actually going to see the type of change that we want to see.
In the center of my laptop, I have your sticker, the square one with the wheelchair user on it. I have that on the center of my laptop, and people ask me about it all the time. Like my daughter asks me about it all the time, but I just wanted to name that. I'm not remembering the exact quote you have on it, but as soon as I got that in your mail art that month, I was like, oh, yes, exactly.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because that is a whole other aspect of abolition that I'd love to bring into this space, which the quote from the sticker says, abolition means none of us are free until we're all free. And I think that to me speaks to the ways that I organize and a lot of other organizers I know focus on uplifting and amplifying the voices of the most marginalized, because when you do that, everybody benefits. And if we focus on the people who are the most exploited by the system and tackle whatever issues are there, that is the best way to move forward.
What are the intersections you perceive between Judaism and abolition?
I think at least my experience of Judaism is already very abolitionist because I grew up in the Reform tradition. And then from there, as an adult, I started practicing Reconstructionist Judaism. And then now I identify as like eco-spiritual Jew. So I think I grew up realizing that trying to fit within a system of Judaism that didn't really ever hold space for me, and specifically as a Black queer woman, helped me realize that, like, no offense to Reform Jews, but for me, I just didn't feel like seen in that space.
Same.
So,
just want to affirm that because literally same.
yeah, like, no offense. Like, I think like there's a lot of joy and a lot of beauty there, but the religion didn't reflect what I was experiencing. And then going into reconstructing Judaism, that was my first time, I think, engaging in spirituality in a congregation in an abolitionist way, because reconstructing Judaism is really just kind of about going back to the past, looking at what traditions we have let go of that we need to reawaken, what things are we doing now that we need to let go of, how can we have a Judaism that shifts and changes with the people that are practicing it, which to me was just such a radical way to approach religion, and that was great. Still didn't really feel represented as like a queer Black woman in those spaces. So eco-spiritual Judaism, I haven't actually met more than like 2 other people who identify in that way. So it is kind of a bit of a solo journey. I don't really have a congregation at this point, but it feels like the most abolitionist way to practice my spirituality. Like I'm choosing every day what my rituals look like, what my synagogue is, who's my rabbi. It's the biggest tree in the forest. That's it. It feels really radical and liberating to choose to know that I'm practicing and living a divine life outside of books that were written by people who wouldn't be able to comprehend the experiences that I go through daily.
I just want to name that I've never actually heard that phrasing before of eco-spiritual Judaism before. I love that language. What I've been using is Afro-Jewish womanist, but in, like a queer praxis kind of way. But I love eco-spiritualist. Could you give kind of like a working personal definition of what eco-spiritualist Judaism means? Because I feel like it's probably in alignment with Afro-Jewish womanism. So I'm curious.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear like how you define Afro-Jewish womanism, because that sounds amazing too. I really love womanism, and I don't find that it's like a term that's used as often as it should be, because I just think it's feminism, but the way feminism was supposed to be. So I guess you could say I'm like a eco-spiritual Jewish womanist, like definitely for sure. But yeah, eco-spiritual to me means placing divinity in the world and outside of, like reducing it just to like textbooks and histories, divinity being in truth like a permanent thing that you can find even if you weren't born Jewish growing up in a synagogue. Eco-spiritual to me is rooted in nature, understanding that humans are created and are creatures that have a unique role in affecting our environment in ways that are like a lot very severe compared to other species on the earth, but still recognizing that we're like a part of a whole. And then that being the basis for like deciding what's good and what's not good and how to behave and live a good life. And then that changes based on the conditions of the planet. Yeah, I mean, I know that perhaps maybe we'll in future generations not be on Earth. I don't know, but we're on Earth now. So I feel like having a religion rooted in that, like the place we are, just feels the most reasonable, beautiful. It's easy to practice it.
What do you think about abolitionist theories that don't either root themselves in kind of like an eco spiritual realm or just don't engage at all with anything related to ecology and our planet in general? Is it abolitionist if there's no attention paid to the ecological realm, I guess?
It can be effective at some things, but it'll never be effective at like solving the problem, because like the root, I think, if of everything is the way that we're like exploiting the planet, and then that's reflected in how we exploit each other. That's how we exploit our own bodies, how we exploit everything. We have such an exploitative relationship with everything around us. So if we don't acknowledge the ways that abolitionists have to work to advocate for the earth, if they're not doing that, then I would say that it's only going to get you so far. I know there's a lot of effective abolitionist organizing happening that has like no consciousness of ecology, but it's just not going to be able to solve things in a way that's going to be sustainable. And I'm trying to find and organize with as many people who root their politics in human rights, equity, against animal cruelty, everything like that. And then also earth stewardship and climate consciousness. That type of stuff is, I want the full picture. Makes things pretty complicated, but some ways makes it a lot easier. When you don't isolate one thing, you look at the whole thing.
I feel like whenever we isolate something, like we always end up being led back to the connectivity to other things. Just because nothing lives in isolation, like I just can't imagine, yeah, trying to focus on just and like getting rid of prisons and jails and not seeing how that connects back to the earth and not seeing how that connects to like what's happening across the world from us in Palestine or Iran. And it feels really hard for me when people are not able to see the threads and how they are all tied. And I do think the grounding in stewardship of the earth and ecological justice quite literally is the root. These systems can only exist because we live on the planet where they're happening, and all of them negatively impact the planet that we live on. Like the destruction that all of these systems end up doing to the earth feels like, yes, just so inextricable to me. So I really appreciate that lens of really paying attention to the way all of these things tie together and tie back to the earth and the way we like engage with the earth and treat the earth. And I feel like capitalism is also just such an important factor here. We can't talk about abolition and the earth without talking about capitalism and the ways that like capitalism is, in my mind, like the scaffolding that upholds these systems or pushes them forward and is inherently destructive.
It's the literal grounding. Like all of these institutions we're talking about are literally materially grounded in earth. So like one thing I'm thinking about a lot here in Lenape-Hoking, so-called New York City, is all like the closed Rikers movement to me is honestly like what you were saying earlier, where it's like, sure, abolition can get us far, but we can't really solve, like get to the root of it if we're not saying land back when we're saying close Rikers. Like, what are we doing? Coming up with all of these plans for what's going to happen to Rikers after it's closed. How are we not saying land back? Like, this is necessarily what we have to be talking about.
I saw a post today that made me be like, oh, I think this is going to come up when we talk later. But it was something Mom Donnie posted about like, we have to act, like we're taking actionable steps to close Rikers, which like, thank you, amazing. But that the action step they were taking was opening more beds at Bellevue, which is a hospital in New York City. And that is just like such a reformist step to take from there, is to just like open another carceral space. Because like inpatient, like any inpatient, especially like an inpatient psych stay, is carceral. Like we were talking about this last time. Hospitals replicate carceral patterns all the time. So like for that to be the step that we're taking to close Rikers is just kind of like, doesn't that just leave us where we were before?
Another one of the big steps they're doing is they're literally building new jails in all of the boroughs except Staten Island to replace them, right? And so one of the things I've been thinking is like, because here's the thing. While there are jails, they need to not be like they are. Like Rikers is a horrific torture chamber, concentration camp. And so they're building these new jails that are supposed to be really nice. But one thing I'm thinking is like, we need to be thinking 10 years ahead. We need to turn those jails into homeless shelters, but ultimately land back. I guess in thinking of this conversation, do you see kind of similar things happening where you are? Like what are some crossovers, I guess?
It's similar here. We've been having this ongoing struggle to stop a cop city being built, which would be a militarized like police playground, so that they could practice urban warfare in the case of like mass uprisings, which is just obviously distasteful. And they're also like being trained by Israeli soldiers who are using the same tactics on Palestinians. So that whole thing is such a big, massive issue. And from struggling with activists and other organizers around that issue for so long, we're seeing the ways that having that singular focus on stopping Cop City needed to be expanded, especially with Israel after October 7th. A lot of, I would say every Stop Cop City organizer like stretched to then like prioritize and pivot to calling for a free Palestine and connecting that to the ways that Israeli soldiers train Atlanta police. But even then, it's difficult. I think that's something that I'm working hard with my comrades with lately, is kind of just pausing to reflect and come up with a very specific and clear goal and strategy that speaks to as many intersections as we can pull in as possible. Because I think that, I don't know, at least in my experience, organizing seems to be very like reaction based to things that happen. And then the things that happen are huge and terrible. And they happen all the time, multiple times a year. And it's very hard when you have a heart that like cares for everything to focus on the one particular thing. And then people get burnt out and then they pivot and then organizations can't really like hold people. So I'm trying to just pause and see what can we do that's like actually going to affect the root of the issues, because Cop City is being built on stolen land, and the land was supposed to be, because there was like a prison farm on the land as well, and there was going to be like a whole like memorial and acknowledgement of what happened there. And there were all these promises made to the community that never got saw through. And then the way I've always approached my organizing against Cop City is based in the fact that Atlanta needs large forests to survive climate change. And then just the residents, the majority Black communities and low-income communities that surround that area benefit so much from having such a massive area of trees and land there to absorb heavy rainfall, heat. Forests are so incredible for so many reasons. I'm always learning more and more why. So I think focusing on that root issue of the whole problem makes sense. And while y'all were talking about New York trying to build more prisons as a way to deal with Rikers, that made me think about the ways prisons are anti-environmental justice and then also against the human spirit. You put people in prison, supposedly, to isolate them so they can't harm anyone else, but then you just harm them over and over every day, every second, and then you put them out and you're like, don't harm anyone else. But also harm is justice. So keep that in mind. I don't know. I kept seeing in my head while you were talking, what if a severe harm was done to a person, you were then in a space where you were surrounded by just nature. You were just forced to reflect in nature for a while with like all your needs met, food, hygiene, etc. But you're not isolated in like a wall under fluorescent lights with like people in uniform name calling you and hating you and treating you like you're less than human. And instead, you have to take care of the land for a while. I think prison as it is now and just recreating it more humanely won't work if we think that means taking people out of environment and out of like community. I know y'all know how messed up isolation is on the human brain and how it doesn't help you heal.
Would y'all mind if I gave a real brief overview of the history of Rikers Island? It's the late 1800s, and Rikers Island, which by the way, was about 40% smaller back then, until they literally landfilled it. Like it's as big as it is because of the landfill process. Once upon a time, there were so much toxic waste on the island that there were explosions on the island that you could see from Queens, and they actually had to like move the location of that, what is it called, the World Fair, because of those explosions. At one point there were so many rats on the island that the city brought in a whole bunch of dogs onto the island to decimate the rat population, right? So that's the history on which Rikers Island is built, a literal landfill that is now a heat island where people are dying, right, because of the wild conditions that are exacerbated by climate catastrophe. So not only are they isolated on this island, that's going on. And so Rikers Island is an environmental justice issue because of what's going on ecologically, right? And that immediately makes me think the four lungs. Just based on what I said about Rikers Island and then earlier about why we can't say close Rikers without saying land back, given how climate catastrophe and mass incarceration are, hand in hand when we're talking about colonial projects. What are some similarities between what's going on in that specific regard to what's going on locally to you?
What comes to my head in the moment is, I think it's the World Cup that's coming this year to Atlanta. So they moved the World Fair so people wouldn't have to address the issue of what they were doing on Rikers Island. And that's definitely happening in Atlanta. I think they even had like a big convention with the police to say like, the World Cup is coming, we will be ready. And it was a whole thing. It was really ridiculous. And they had all these people fly in to talk about how they were going to like make sure the activists didn't have any traction. It's interesting too, because now they're like trying to improve the city in ways that they haven't in a long time. My grandmother, my bubby, she's lived here forever. And she was saying that like the last time they did this was during the Olympics when they came to Atlanta. So they just tend to not do anything until they feel like people are paying attention to it. The city has like a huge issue where they're not providing affordable housing. They're not providing any rest areas for people to like rest at like bus stops. I take MARTA a lot now, and MARTA is Atlanta's transit system. And there's like a bench per every like 10 buses we just have like a very anti-human design for the city. And then there's just so many moments of history that are being erased and uncovered. I was recently talking to a comrade about Stone Mountain. I think it's a man-made mountain, but it has the biggest Confederate monument engraved on the side of it. And it's also built on stolen land, and the ways that Georgia in general is trying not to reckon with the fact that any expansion or development in this country, in this state, not acknowledging the crimes that it's committed to have as much wealth as it has, isn't going to be done without resistance. People are definitely working hard to make sure that the capitalist plans aren't successful and that justice does happen. It's very hard. Difficult when they're like destroying whole forests. It's a big project. It's a big enemy to face off with, one that can wreck an entire lung for a city.
I wanted to bring us back to the values that you brought up so beautifully before, that they're like inherent to Judaism, values that go against or come into clash with Cop City. And you actually co-wrote a beautiful article about this. So for people who have not read the piece, do you want to talk a little bit more about Jewish values against Cop City?
I wrote a article with my friend Adam Brunel for the magazine Earth First, and we wrote it as a way to raise awareness about why stopping Cop City was an environmental justice issue. And we also wanted to highlight the ways that it was actually kind of building the eco-spiritual Jewish community that I was looking for. I think it really awakened for me in a real practical way when I was organizing to stop Cop City in the forest, because that's where the movement began. The forest wasn't cut down yet. And the article we wrote spoke about the ways Jewish people were gathering for ritual routinely in the forest and incorporating the land in our practices and just having community amongst so many beautiful trees and amongst so much beautiful land and creatures and waterways. It was just such a deeply meaningful experience. And there was also a whole thing where people were living in the forest, and there were like people who were living in trees to make sure they wouldn't be cut down. There was a communal kitchen that was happening, and there was a large group of people who didn't have access to housing, who then moved into the forest, which I thought was beautiful because, you know, people were able to, like, not having a house wasn't criminalized. It was still criminalized, and they did crack down on it. But in the forest, it was a moment to like experience what it could be like if we weren't like, hey, you know, you can't sleep there, you know, like let people be where they want to be. And God, it was so amazing and so meaningful and so beautiful. And the people that congregated there were all ecologically justice oriented. It was great to experience that. So that article is like a little capsule of what it felt like in that moment to be a Jewish person fighting to stop Cop City. There's still a good deal of forest left, but there's like a huge scar where they're building the Cop City and they're like cut everything down, paving it, concrete, et cetera, et cetera.
When I was reading back on this article, which I actually remember reading when it came out a few years ago, it stood out to me. There are so many current situations in which we are like fighting for justice and liberation that feel so obviously reflected in Jewish values, but then that many Jewish people will find Jewish workarounds for. Like, there's so many Jewish ethics and laws that you relate in the article to, like, why it's a Jewish value to stop Cop City, like talking about Baal Tashchit, like do not destroy, and that every life is a world, talking about the person who was murdered in the forest and saying a life has been destroyed and with it the whole world, and this is a Jewish value. And so like thinking about the ways that these values are like so obviously applicable to stopping Cop City and to like freeing Palestine and for liberation in Palestine, I feel like it can be really difficult for me to understand how people who are Jewish don't see the ties or don't see the ways in which these injustices are so obviously against Jewish values.
I think it is of incredible value to acknowledge the ways that our tradition and our scripture literally like advocates for environmental protection and advocates for justice. So many of our holidays are focused on reflecting on the ways we've caused harm and then repairing that. Literally, there's just so much about being Jewish that is rooted in ecological justice and just justice work in general. So I'm really glad to have had the time to put on paper. My friend Adam grew up in scripture a lot more than I did. I grew up kind of secularly, the world to come and the work of realizing that what we have now isn't the future, and it's our role and duty to bring that to reality. In teshuva, like repentance being an act, being an actual thing that you do rather than just a vibe or a shirt that you buy, but a real thing that you practice daily all the time because you make mistakes all the time every day. So why not make repair all the time every day in a way that's joyful and beautiful in community? Like it's not a burden you carry by yourself, but it's a part of being Jewish and alive and part of the cycle. The cycle is only a problem if there isn't any repair.
I'm a therapist, and something I've been learning about in the last few months is it's called alliance focused therapy, but it really focuses on the fact that there's constantly ruptures and repairs happening in the therapeutic space, and that extends to like all of our interactions. And ruptures don't even need to be like not something wild happens that's like a really big event. It's just even small things like a misunderstanding and how we're communicating, or like misperceived like body language. Those things are ruptures, and we repair from them all the time. And I think like the idea of making rupture and repair from rupture an active process, and like really becoming more comfortable with like the fact that rupture or conflict happens in our life all the time, and we do have the tools to engage with it, is such a Jewish value. Like thinking about teshuva, like that's exactly as you were saying it, I was like, ugh, I love how everything can be Jewish if we just like really think about it. And I mean, I think extends to what we're talking about when we're talking about abolition and organizing. Like, what does it mean to, on large scales, think about very explicit forms of like oppression and violence, and how do we move through them societally and communally, and on individual levels within organizing, what happens when there is like ruptures between in organizing spaces, and like how do we repair within organizing spaces to continue doing the necessary work. What is your experience with accountability and teshuva as it relates to organizing, or even like larger scale forms of teshuva?
That's something I'm thinking about a lot these days, just admitting when I cause harm, really small or really big, and then not taking it personal at all, and then going from there. I forgot who brought this to me, but there was a Jewish friend or professor who told me at one point that there's this mindset that some have in some areas of Christianity where, you know, there's this idea that Adam and Eve created this big sin, and then like everything afterwards is just kind of like their punishment. They're always suffering because of the thing that they did that was so bad, and we're all a result of that problem. Whereas some Jewish people believe that everything that happened there was supposed to happen and it's just part of the cycle of things. Personally, I think if I put people in a forest and I was like, don't eat that apple, I'm expecting them to eat the apple. I just want them to do it when they're ready. And once they do, then it comes with consequences. And that's not a big deal. So kind of the idea that like you can make a mistake and then you just have consequences now to deal with. And it's not a stain on your character or on you as a person. It's just a thing that happened that should now be dealt with respectfully, mindfully, with love. And small ways this can happen. This morning I was having some grapes, and there was one grape that looked kind of like odd. So I threw it away. But then I thought to myself, I was like, there was nothing wrong with that grape. And I'm also started worm composting lately, and that's been really interesting. Just seeing all my trash.
Shout out from the
It's
compost.
incredible. I
Yes.
recommend it. I think anyone should do it. All you need are a couple 5-gallon buckets, some worms. You can get worms anywhere, which I didn't know because I bought worms, but actually there's worms everywhere all the time. You just have to dig a little bit.
Are they Uncle Jim's worms?
I got Uncle Jim's worms.
Hey, yeah, you did.
I like them. I'm really happy with them. Apparently they're like the worm. So anyone interested in worms, go to Uncle Jim, get your worms. It'll teach you to appreciate trash in a way that helps you see the ways you've seen trash in everything and how none of it's trash and all of it can be recycled and all of it can become a sunflower. I'm growing sunflowers with the trash. So I was just thinking like, oh, this grape, I could have composted it. And this thing that I didn't want to eat, someone else could have eaten. And I shouldn't have just thrown it away because of my first impression of it. And that's kind of like a mental thing I'm going through every day, all the time. And it's getting a lot easier to let go when I point out a harm that I've done and I think of how I can fix it. I'm just like, oh, well, we'll compost the next grape that we don't want to eat and keep moving it forward. But then you're just kind of like, it's good that I did that so that I can make a practice of composting more. Like it transforms you and makes you better. And that's like a personal way that Judaism can like play into teshuva, but on an organization level, I'm thinking of the ways that conflicts usually don't get resolved and people end up leaving organizations from burnout or harms caused between members. And I just think of the ways that on Yom Kippur, through the high holidays, we're supposed to acknowledge the things that we've done wrong and then repair them, talk to people, admit it, move forward. I haven't actually done that part because it's scary, but I think about it and I'm like, I won't do that again next year. But I think that coming to the point where you could actually talk to people about what you've done and really apologize, or if someone harmed you, having them come to you and say, hey, this happened, let's talk about it. If you could be that person when you've caused harm, just imagine the ways that our like organizations could transform and the whole world could transform. And I'm also thinking of how we have a day of mourning every year where we just kind of process like the tragedies that have occurred in the history of our people and then also within our own lives. And if you're going through loss, you come back to that ritually to process it, acknowledge it, hold space for the spirit. All of those things I feel like can be done secularly within organizations so that there's a practice of holding hard feelings because many of us really feel wrong when we're feeling bad, whereas we should just feel uncomfortable, but that uncomfortableness isn't bad or wrong. And it's important because when it's suppressed, change can't happen, problems can't be acknowledged, growth can't happen, repair can't happen. The Jews are, I think, really interesting because we're very okay with things not being okay and making sure we address that and move forward.
Earlier, you mentioned something, you just used the word consequences when you were talking about navigating rupture. And I feel like everything you just said speaks to this, where the way I've been trying to approach conflict lately has been, let's think less about whether something is good or bad, and let's just be honest about what happened materially and the consequences of those actions, right? And I also thought about this podcast episode with Dr. Max Liboiron called Reorienting Ourselves in a World of Plastics, where they talk about how, the range of plastics that we are coexisting with on our shared planetary home body, they are our kin. And they ask, what do we do with bad kin? We're not going to take the colonizer approach and just say destroy, destroy. We're going to say, how do we reorient, knowing that this is the truth? So then I think of rupture and I think of just physically, geologically, our shared planetary home body, thinking of volcanoes as a rupture, just as an example, right? We have this fire, we have this movement, we have this shifting, we have lava, and then we also have eventually andesols, which are incredibly fertile soils created out of what is ejected from volcanoes. All of that said, I've noticed in my own relationships when we stop thinking less about who did something bad or who is doing something good, and just we're really honest and we're like, this is what happened, these are the consequences. Now, how do we reorient ourselves in relationship so that we can repair this rupture together? I feel like if we take more notes just from our planet. The tectonic plates, they're shifting. There's going to be an earthquake, period. We necessarily just have to figure out what to do after that, right? It's not good or bad. There was an earthquake. Now what do we do? And I feel like when we take lessons from our shared planetary homebody, there's a wildfire. There's period. There is a wildfire. Now what do we do? I feel like when we take that and apply that to when we're trying to do conflict resolution, it just changes things because then we can reorient and it's less, oh, now you are a bad kin. It's something occurred and now there's going to be some type of response, some type of consequence that we need together to come up with a way to repair together. All of these ruptures that happen in these institutions and such. And I know we use the language of secular, but something else that came to mind was, however secular it is, this is a religiously constructed space, most often Christian. So we're bringing in, whether we want to like it or not, these deeply Christian values that these quote secular institutions are rooted in. And that just adds a whole other layer to how we navigate conflict.
That was amazing. I loved all of it. Wow. And you're so right about secular. I didn't think of that in the moment, but when I said secular, I was thinking spaces devoid of any like mindfulness of like the planet and like our humanity. And the reality is a lot of that is created from like this like evangelical Western white supremacist. That's what it is. That's what secular is. That you go anywhere else, it's not secular anymore. There's culture, there's spirit, and it's been interesting bringing that into spaces, and then people coming and resisting it in hopes of more isolation, more compartmentalization. I love acknowledging like that's what we're up against when we try and bring ecospiritualism, Judaism, ecology, justice into spaces that have resisted that for a long time.
What you were saying, Jesse, is also like bringing me back to our conversation in our first episode about how all flourishing is mutual. Everything we could possibly need, the earth has for us. Like it is all there for us already. And what lessons we can learn from the natural world and about reciprocity and like repair and change and accountability are lessons that the earth teaches even on like the smallest levels every day. Judaism is inherently a religion that has long been tied to the natural world. So many of our rituals are tied to the world around us, thinking about not just like the obvious ones like Tu B'Shvat, but like Rosh Chodesh and the way that Judaism follows the lunar calendar and the moon cycles and the ways that we really pay attention to the earth that we live on. Everything is so interconnected. This is bringing us back to like even our original conversation around all of the connectivity and how so much of it leads back to the earth, and just feeling sad that so many of us, myself included, in our day-to-day like experience so much distance from the earth. And even in the small ways of like when I walk outside and I step on the ground, it's like the pavement and it's different than stepping on soil or not having access to be outside in a forest with a lot of ease, although there are some forests in New York City that I can be in, which is great. But yeah, thinking about what that does to us and what it would mean for us all if we could be more connected to, as Jesse calls it, like our, what do you say, Jesse, like our non-human kin?
And today is day 7 of counting the Omer, and that's Malchut of Chesed. It's sovereignty and loving kindness. Imagine if all observances of counting the Omer were necessarily like, no, we're actually going to root this entire observance. I mean, like literally, it is. It's what, barley? Like we're literally talking about our shared planetary homebody. But imagine like actually observing it was really rooting in that. And they were like, no, we're going to think about loving kindness. We're going to think about sovereignty specifically through a lens of eco-spiritual Judaism, which honestly like makes the most sense. And the fact that a lot of places don't, it's like, what are we really doing here? Like, what are we actually doing here? Like, what's the actual point if we're not doing that? There actually technically is no point if we're not really rooting it in that.
I love that framing that you gave us to Ayeola about like even the Adam and Eve of it all, that everything was supposed to play out that way, because I think there are still a lot of Jews or just people in general who are like Eden is the goal, right? Like just being in nature and resting is the goal and not working, right? Nobody dreams of labor. Like absolutely. We're all searching for some kind of Eden, but the tree of knowledge, Eve is told, if you eat from this, you'll know like what God knows. Like you'll be on the level of a supreme being. And she's like, dope. You know, I don't think she's stupid. I think she's like, that's worth it. Like, yeah, like what? I don't care what happens here. Like, because I think a lot of times the patriarchal view is she's just like, oh, maybe I should eat from this and let's see what happens. It's like, no, I think she like wagered. Like, she was like, this is worth it. And what I love is it's like, that's the beginning of a sci-fi movie sometimes, you know. I always go back to Jurassic Park because it's like my favorite movie. Let me just put a side note here. I'm not saying Steven Spielberg is connected to Jewish values and was representing all this. I hate when people try to do that. I don't think he did it on purpose at all. I don't think it's like
Life finds a way.
Exactly. It's not his like, hi, like, you know, tree of life. No, I don't think that's what it is. But there's so many quotes in there, like where they get to a point where like when I think it's Jeff Goldblum's line where he's like, your scientists were so obsessed with like whether they could do it and not if they should. But like kind of what we're talking about with the plastics of it all is like they bring back these dinosaurs, right? And they're like, they're here. This is a fact of life now that like they exist. And in one of the later Jurassic World movies, Vincent D'Onofrio's character is like, we could use these for war and we could save so many human lives. And the thing is, he's not wrong. He could save human lives with a dinosaur. Like, sure, that would save a lot of humans. But suddenly the conversation shifts like, well, now these are animals. They exist. They have rights. And there are other people who are like, no, they don't have rights. They're just property. We created them in a lab. And anyway, it's just exploring some of those deeper conversations about the things we create on this planet. Just because we created it, does that mean they don't have rights? It goes into the AI discussion. It goes into all these things about what is the life we're creating. And yeah, if plastics are part of our body's makeup now, which is like, well, how did we get here? That is a part of our lives. And so I just really appreciate this reframe because it brings in the Jewish values, but it also brings in the science fiction questions that people kind of disregarded as like, oh yeah, that's just fantasy, that's fiction, that's not real. And here we are contending with the real questions that come up when we try to adopt that colonial ownership mindset over living beings.
Two things. One, you can look this up. Every year, an adult human shits a credit card's worth of microplastics. I'm going to start with that. Second of all, honestly, I wish I could ask Stephen, what were the values that were driving your writing, your direction, and how cinematography was going on? Because I feel like this is honestly an important question. How are our values, our guiding questions in life shaping our art, like specifically for artists, for writers, for poets, for what is going into what we're actually making? Which has me thinking, like, how are these values you've been talking about, the principles that you stand by, how do you feel like they're shaping your work, your art?
Well, first, I just want to say I love talking about how so much pop culture and art, when you get down to the root of it, speaks to the same things humanity has been grappling with forever. And I think that can be a coincidence, but also a lot of artists are very intentional, but they just don't talk about it because they don't want to make their work seem less secular or whatever. But yeah, I think it also just happens because we're human. So those things come out of us and resonate with other people in ways that we couldn't have imagined, but just would have happened because we share a humanity with each other. I think that for artists, being more intentional about your values, inspiring the work that you do, is the best thing that we can do, because there's so much power, I think, in creating forms that people then engage with and are impressed by. So the more that we can be mindful about what we're doing, the better like our work can impact people in the ways that we hope. I was thinking about this piece that I did. It was an illustration of, I believe, Rosa Luxemburg, and there was a quote in it. She was speaking in a letter to a friend who was saying, like, we should be more concerned about the Jewish struggles right now than like other stuff. And she wrote back, and I'm paraphrasing, what is it with the special suffering of the Jews? My heart goes to the like African people and who are being oppressed by the British colonizers right now. And my heart goes to like all these different places where like oppression is also happening. And then she said, my home and my heart is wherever there are trees and bird song and like wind, which to me felt very like eco-spiritual Judaism. And she didn't have to be eco-spiritual, but she was in that moment. I think it's just something that comes out of Jewish people and people in general, because we were created from dust. So obviously we're going to have earth oriented mindsets because we're created from earth elements. So it just happens. And the more intentional you can be about it, the better. And she's being very intentional. She's like, yes, I'm Jewish, but my values are rooted in humanity and the earth and planet and love. So that means that I advocate for all of those people in my work. And it's the same for me. Pivoted from doing a lot of art that's centered specifically on Jewish stories and Jewish struggles, because I realized that my values were rooted in something that encapsulated everything. I still use Jewish language and culture as a part of my practice, very specifically in some pieces, but overall, I'm trying to be a lot more intentional about speaking from my specific values, and those being environmental sustainability, loving kindness, forgiveness, and then an appreciation for, our elder. There's so many things that are just like universal that I try to operate from.
One of my go-to texts when I just need to be revitalized is I read Rosa Luxemburg's prison letters specifically to Sophie. And one thing I love, and this is a whole other conversation, but something that frustrates me is when people, write their great analyses about like revolutionary women or just women in general who are writing, and they do not name their Jewishness. We see it with Jamaica Kincaid, we see it with Howardina Pindell, we see it with Rosa Luxemburg, and you named it explicitly. If you read specifically her letters to Sophie from prison, that is eco-spiritualist. I feel like it's like a series of an eco-spiritual manifesto. She's writing about why we need to be in botanic gardens. She's writing about how the thing that is helping her survive incarceration is looking out of the jail and getting to know all of the birds that are local to her area, getting to know the bird songs, getting to know the trees, looking at the moon from the bars, like orienting herself in this carceral space through this ecological lens, through a very eco-spiritual lens. And so you just naming that right there, and whatever you're referencing, I don't think I've actually read that, and now I need to. But Jews are earth oriented. Some of them may either deny it or ignore it or erase it or not center it. But when it really comes down to it, that's what's going on.
I'm so glad you brought this, because I'm going to have to read her prison letters. I haven't read them all. We're going to talk about this eventually, but Jesse and I both have been meaning to meet and talk about revolutionary suicide. And I think a lot about what Huey P. Newton wrote in the book where he was incarcerated and how he was able to survive that. It just made me think of how Rosa was trying to draw inspiration and love from the earth to get through her incarceration. We also talked earlier about how like prisons, like isolating people from the environment, is like one of the like human rights abuses that occurs. I love this conversation.
Big fan of bringing Rosa into everything. And it's really that. And that's part of the violence of the prison system, is ensuring that people who are there do not have access to anything but concrete, metal, steel, and blood. Like that's what you're being exposed to on a regular basis while suffering the harms brought on by climate catastrophe, whether it's the poisons, the mold of the toxic built environment that are impacting your body, whether it's the urban heat island effect, all of these things. So you're necessarily impacted by the elements, and you're cut off from any sense of actual access to being able to put your hands in the soil, being able to touch the trees, being able to walk into the water, like all of these things. It's just this ultimate deprivation. It's so violent, just like very briefly. So in this borough-based jails project that's going on in New York City, the plan is like close Rikers, and then we have these new jails that are like inspired by the aesthetic of the neighborhoods that they're going to be in, right? Like the one in Brooklyn by me, it's inspired by the Brooklyn Heights brownstones, and they're inspired by like letting all this light in. Like they use the word light a lot in the design process, and there's a whole bunch where they talk about these are the kind of trees that are going to be on the ground floor, and here's the atrium, or we're going to have these, and we're going to have this, and we're going to have this. In the Chinatown one, for instance, which is, and this is a whole other conversation, we're talking about imperial forestry. In the Chinatown mega jail that they're calling a jail scraper, by the way, there's going to be a bunch of Japanese trees brought to the Chinatown jail. And that's a whole other conversation. And then when we zoom out and talk about how, the cells of the carceral system expand beyond the jails and prisons to the hospitals, to the schools, to the homes, think about certain communities where they have less trees, certain communities where there's less healthy soil, communities where they have more proximity to waste transfer stations, landfills, etc., heightened pollution. And it's all related.
Humans and the earth are so incredibly resilient, and people like Rosa and Huey survived incarceration because of the natural world around them and because of community and resilience and values. And I'm thinking about this book that I have. It's called The Prisoner's Herbal. It has profiles of 10 different plants that are commonly found in prison yards. So often, a lot of them are like plants we would consider weeds, but commonly grow through the cracks or can survive in really harsh environments. And the ways that people who are incarcerated can use these plants for medicinal purposes, or to use different foods or spices or condiments that might be available from commissary for medicinal purposes or to care for self. And I think that, I don't know, that's just like so powerful. Like in that it demonstrates both the ways that like the earth and plants are so resilient, even when we create environments that make it hard for them to grow in, and how people, even when we place them in disgusting and terrible and violent and oppressive systems, will still find ways to survive and connect with the earth. And I'm just thinking in general about wanting to infuse this with some of the hope as a discipline that is there, where it's like people who are in some of the worst possible conditions we can imagine are real people who are fighting every day and making use of things in their environment to get through.
Life finds a way.
Exactly. There's so much we've covered in this episode. Before we get to like, where can people find your work and how can they support you? Because guys, if you have not already seen Ayeola's artwork for some reason, I don't know if you're listening to this podcast, I don't really know how you would not have before, but if for some reason you haven't, you obviously have to go and look at all of the incredible art that she creates. There'll be a link in the show notes, and she'll tell us in one moment like how you can really support her in being an artist. But before we get there, if you could leave our listeners with one message, what would that message be?
All right, this is my message of the time, which is that if you are seeking more connection with the earth, if you're seeking more connection with your ancestors, more time to read about people who've survived, horrible conditions, ones that mirror your own, ones that are worse, something you want something to draw strength from and lessons from, the best thing you can do is log off. Just log off as much as possible. I think that that's something that I've been enjoying. I have a friend who recently told me that if I wanted to get better at reading and like doing the things I want to do outside of social media, I should just take my phone out of my bedroom. And that was like the first step towards the space where I'm in now, where I'm reading like almost as much as I used to be scrolling, which is, hours and hours a day. And I'm gardening and hanging out with people. And I think it's the biggest thing that can happen for people who are like just wanting more from life. There's more hours in the day, the less you spend on your phone or in front of a television or in front of a screen. Life just starts to begin happening around you once you start like paying attention to it and showing up for it and being around for it and meeting people. That's the biggest message I would have for people. And then Jewish people, it's our job. Okay. We're supposed to take care of the planet, and you cannot do that from a phone screen. So you have to get out there, find the environment around you and work with that. I live in an apartment right now, and I had these realizations that I feel like everyone should be gardening just a little bit, like maybe just some herbs or something. And I used to feel overwhelmed, like, oh, I can't do anything in the apartment. It's so shaded. My balcony is completely in the shadows, but there are a lot of plants that grow in the shadows There's a lot you can do with just a 6-inch pot. Worms can be bred and like fed and loved on in the home, and it doesn't smell. Worms shouldn't smell. If they smell, it means that you haven't given them enough air or enough food or enough water. Mine have not smelled yet, and it's been about 2 months. So breeding worms is also a good idea if you're considering it. Very cheap. Yeah, just get in touch with nature. Spend some time in your local environment. Even in an apartment, you can find a green space where you can plant some flowers.
2 things. One, I want to add to the show notes. I've got a ton of resources on composting and vermicompost because I'm a compost educator. That's one of my jobs. But 2, speaking of logging off, I want to be, and this is a totally real plug. This isn't just me saying it for the sake of this episode. I print out your coloring sheets, and me and my daughter color them on the train. I print them out, make them kind of small so I could just fit them in my pocket. And we color your coloring sheets on a regular basis. And not only do we have a fun time coloring, my daughter like reads now and she loves to read them. And then we have really incredible conversations about the messages on them. And so I just want to tell to anybody, if you want to log off, you want to do some coloring, join your art mail club. And like I said, I'm not just saying that, I'm literally a part of that club. And I get so excited when I get your art in the mail.
Thank you. I really appreciate that so much. It means so much to me to like send something in the mail and then know that you're receiving it, enjoying it, engaging with it. And then it's like fun for your little one. That just makes me so happy.
Could you share with listeners how they can like sign up for your monthly subscription, or like ways that they can support you as an artist generally?
Yeah, I would say the best way to support me would be to join my Patreon. I think I have 5 different tiers. There's like a tip jar, it's like $3 a month. And then at $7 at that tier, you get like a sticker every month, you get coloring pages, and you get access to all the work that I can't post on social media because it's either just not released yet or Mark Zuckerberg wouldn't allow it. So it's the best way to support me. I also have a zine / sticker sheet tier if you're into that. Yeah, and it's really great because I'm going to do art. At this point, I've realized I'm going to do art forever, no matter what. So whether it's profitable for me or not, I will be doing art. But you want to make it like a livelihood for me. Joining my Patreon helps a lot. And I'm also hoping to transition into more physical media soon. I got into digital art because it allowed me to create a lot faster and a lot more. But I really just want to start creating things that I think are a lot more developed and take more time. But that type of work, a Patreon would help a lot with that because it allows me to take like a month on an oil painting rather than having to do 5 different digital pieces in a month. It's just more sustainable. So I can make that transition through people joining on Patreon. So that would be the best bet. And I also have a website where you can buy individual prints and stickers. And occasionally I'll do pop-up markets in Atlanta.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jesse and Ayeola and Alana, for this incredible discussion. Ayeola, we will make sure that your work is promoted in the show notes, but also we will be promoting your work on Instagram as well. So please, if you have not signed up for any subscription or any sort of club or any sort of artwork to receive from Ayeola, please make sure you do that. This was a phenomenal conversation. I'm so grateful for your time with us, Ayeola. And yeah, looking forward to ways we can continue to collaborate and work together in the future.
Thanks for having me. It's incredible. I remember the first time we had a podcast interview, and at the end of it, I was like, hopefully we'll do it again sometime. But, just kind of like a little like, hopefully. But the fact that it did happen, I feel like this was a very rich like conversation, and it felt just so amazing to connect with y'all again. So I hope we can do it again. But
absolutely,
yeah,
we'll
great.
keep having you on. We love it. All right, amazing. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Making Mentions. Please consider supporting our work by funding us. You can find the donation link on our website, makingmentions.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Making Mentions. We host monthly Shabbats both in person and online, so make sure to sign up for our newsletter, which is on our website, to get updates.
Making Mentions, the podcast, is produced by Alana Lipkin and Jesse Sander. Intro music is by Nate Sander. Editing by Jesse Sander.